Thank you very much, President Prabha, and thank you for the wonderful introduction, and also thank you for the introduction to all of these wonderful people. I should give you a little bit of background. I've been a global macro investor for over 50 years, and that has brought me to many countries around the world and working with the leadership of those countries and the financial institutions, particularly sovereign wealth funds. And I'm at a stage in my life. I'm now 75 years old, and I'm at a stage in my life, that I don't work for anyone other than I do work for inspiration. And I see in Indonesia, and I see in President Prabowo, what I saw when I was involved in China starting in 1984 when Deng Xiaoping came in, and what I've seen when Lee Kuan Yew came in, and what I'm seeing with great leaders who have the capacity to take a country that has enormous potential and is on the brink of a transition and make it into something that's quite unique. And I measure the potential and the strengths of countries by statistics, like a health index. I have literally health indices of countries that I have used to project their next 10 years growth rates. And there's a number of ingredients. If you'd like me to get into that, I'd be happy to get into those ingredients. But there are a number of ingredients that show that Indonesia is at one of those takeoff points, that it has potential, great potential for being changed and having extraordinary future. Those ingredients include a relatively low debt level, a ability to have capital that can be invested to create that takeoff point. Because once there can be capital formation that is put with this high potential, you get a takeoff point that's taking place in countries repeatedly. And there are a number of such measures that show great potential. And then there are obstacles that have to be overcome. And these measures show these types of obstacles. For example, bureaucratic obstacles, the ease of setting up a business, the entrepreneurship, the capital formation, corruption, many of those. And through my experiences, I have had real world experiences in these countries, China, Singapore, a number of countries, in which I saw how those transitions took place. I know what they're like. And I know the importance of a leader in being able to then take control of the situation and make those very difficult reforms to be able to energize and capitalize and also overcome the barriers of corruption that stand in the way, entrenched interests. How do you revitalize that country? And from speaking to President Prabowo, I think he can be that man. So that brings me here to our situation where I'm having the pleasure of meeting you, because we've talked about these things. And And I can envision how this can happen. And I also am still in a position where I know partners, those around the world, who would be excited to be part of that in various ways. These include world leaders and so on, because we now have a globalized environment in which they can come and help to revitalize and modernize and improve the efficiency of the country if it's allowed to happen. So that's what brings me here today. I follow the world. I bet on what's going to happen. I'm not an academic. I'm a professional global macro investor. And so I know these things. I bet on these things. And when I'm looking at the situation, I think that that potential exists. So we have the pleasure of being able to do that. I think that there are 5 factors that are now taking place in the world that everybody must pay attention to, that are driving the changes in the world order. People ask me, how is the world order changing? How do I make sense of what is happening? So I did a study over the last 500 years that became a book called The Changing World Order. And there are 5 factors that are driving the changes in the world order and changing how things are happening. And those 5 factors have to do first with money and debt and markets. There's a cycle. Money is debt, debt is money, and there is a debt cycle that takes place. And that affects everything because money is buying power. Credit is buying power. And how that is used creates a debt cycle, and that's a very important factor. The second factor across countries, and certainly is true in the United States, very important, is the internal conflict between the left and the right that is populist. And when I say populist, I mean that there are irreconcilable differences, that it is a war. It is no longer a collaboration and a cooperation, and it no longer has compromises to it. It is a war between those 2 factions. And we've seen this in many countries throughout time. So that's the second factor. That factor affects the first factor because it affects taxation, it affects what people think about how the whole country's run. And of course, the third factor is in the change in the geopolitical war that also transpires in a cycle. And the cycle begins when, after a war, there's a war to determine who has what power and what the world order looks like. Now, that happened in 1945. And then through history, through 500 years and going back further than history, you see that there is an arc. And there's always a rising power that challenges an existing power and challenges the world order. And we're seeing that very much happen right now. You see that we're moving from multilateralism, multinationalism, to unilateralism. In other words, individual countries fighting for their interests in a way that has much less cooperation. And so we are in a type of war. That's the third factor. And the fourth factor is, through time, acts of nature. Droughts, floods, and pandemics have killed more people than wars and have toppled more orders, domestic orders or international orders, than the other factors. And certainly the acts of nature, the droughts, floods, and pandemics are a bigger influence today than ever before. And the fifth factor, and the most powerful factor, is man's inventiveness, particularly of new technologies. And so we now see what I believe is the most powerful invention of technology, which is in the form of artificial intelligence, because intelligence affects everything. It affects medicine. It affects how we're doing everything, government and so on. And so those five factors together work to create these arcs and changes in the world order. I've talked too long, but I want to then say that I'm here because I'm inspired by what you can do together and the potential that exists if you can overcome those challenges here. That's why I'm here. I'm not here for money. I've made money. I'm giving away more money by far. So I'm here for the inspiration of that, if I can be of help, because of that potential. And then I think about that contribution. So anyway, thank you for inspiring me, and thank you for letting me to be here to join you. And I welcome our discussion.